This is Catherine Getzky, host of the Hope Matrix podcast. We are here to share science, stories, and strategies for how to hope. I'm the Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, and Shine is the mnemonic for how we teach hope. So when we talk about hope, we talk about how we use stress skills, happiness habits, inspired actions, nourishing networks, and eliminating challenges, which are our thinking patterns that get in the way of our ability to hope. Hope is a skill. You can measure hope, you can teach hope, and you can start practicing skills to activate higher hope in your life today. And on this Hope Matrix podcast, we aim to bring in guests, experts in science, people with stories, and those that have strategies for activating hope in your life. Hi, this is Catherine Getzky here today with the Hope Matrix, a podcast about science stories and strategies for hope. We are here today with Martin Rafferty. He is the CEO of Youth Era, and we're super excited to have him here today. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you, Martin?
I am doing great. It's a beautiful day. I'm actually in Pennsylvania right now, so it's sunny. Back in my home state of Oregon, it's raining, so I'm going to take that as a win.
Yeah, amazing. So I'll first mention by saying we have been working on this podcast and we're taping it on another station, and we had some technical issues, which is this is a perfect example for us to show you how hopeful we are. We took a 90-second deep breath and we regrouped, and we are now recording on Zoom. So happy to be here today and thankful for your patience and commitment to this work. So thank you. I'd love to start by just learning a little bit more about you, Martin. We haven't met before, just a little bit more about you, how you got inspired to do the work, and kind of what you're doing at Youth Era.
So Youth Era is a peer organization, and like so many young people, young adults who do peer work, I had lived experience. So if you look at the trauma before my adoption, and you look at the work that Youth Era does, you'll see a lot of parallels.
That is great. It's really exciting and wonderful to see people with lived experience getting really active in the work, because I think they offer so much insight to youth that are struggling and perspectives that other people just don't have. So, of course, I'm sorry about your experiences, and I wish they hadn't happened, and yet I'm grateful you're taking that and doing something really positive with it.
Yeah, earlier I had mentioned, because we had gotten to this point when we were talking, but that the things that as you mentioned, you have lived experience as well, and I do, and the things the worst moments that I've gone through, both in childhood and adulthood, they propel me, and they propel me to do this work, and you wouldn't wish it on anyone. And in so many stories of young people who've gone through worse moments than I hear them say the same thing that I know in my heart, which is I wouldn't trade those hard moments. I wouldn't give them up either. I wouldn't have chosen them necessarily, but there's something about that lived experience that propels people forward, and it's something you wouldn't trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree. I wouldn't wish my journey on anyone, and yet I'm grateful for all the insights and learnings that I've gotten along the way. Hopelessness is defined as a feeling of despair and a sense of helplessness. So when we look at hopelessness in the world right now, we look at both those feelings, those emotions that are related to despair, and the sense of helplessness that you cannot do anything about it. And there's a lot of that happening in the world. What are some things that you're seeing, and how are you seeing people deal with the sadness, the rage, anger, kind of those feelings as it relates to despair?
Yeah, so I think I get questions like these a lot, especially recently, because there are polls and not polls, there are studies that are coming out, data showing some positive things that are happening here, seemingly positive things. The state of Oregon noticed that during the pandemic, child abuse rates were cut in half. And before you take a breath and think about that, you go, that seems positive. And then you take a moment and you go, wait a minute. No, it's the reporting of those things are not happening because of COVID. Additionally to that, Active Minds, which is a college mental health group, they're noticing that young people are miraculously optimistic, right? And so there are pieces of the pandemic that are still unknown to us. There's so much we don't know about how young people or how society is going to be after the pandemic is over. I would caution, though, that just like that, the child abuse rate, right, that we really are careful about jumping to assumptions, right? The suicide rate for Oregon in 2018, the number one cause of death for teens in Oregon was suicide. And in 2020, the rate is down. But as you know, Youth Era responds to school shootings. We bring peer support teams in and do some of that work. And what we try to explain to schools is that trauma, what we know about trauma is that 6 months and a year after the event is when the most amount of requests of support come from. So when you're looking at, if you are planning for resources for someone who just went through a traumatic moment, and you had $30 to spend, you would want to save like $25 for 1 year later, because that's for whatever reason, that's when people need the most support and need the most access to resources. And so if we look at when COVID started, right, September 11th was 6 months, the anniversary, 6 months since the pandemic was announced. So we're at that 6 month mark. There's no data right now about that mark. All of these surveys are from further back than that. And going into that year anniversary, we're going to hit that in about 5-6 months. And there are some other signs that aren't so hopeful. Depression, loneliness. We're working closely with the University of Oxford. I want to talk to you about Uplift, our project that we're doing with them. But when they surveyed young people about how they're doing, loneliness, depression, and despair were the top 3 things that they noticed on those survey results.
Yeah, there's research that hopelessness is predictive of loneliness. Hopelessness is the only predictor of suicide, kind of consistent predictor of suicide. Hopelessness is the primary symptom of depression. It's a key symptom of anxiety. Hopelessness is predictive of addiction, violence, interpersonal violence, all kinds of things. And that is why we are so passionate about teaching the skills of hope and how to maintain a sense of hope even when the world around you seems to kind of be crashing. We have, even prior to this year and all of the protests and COVID, 50% of inner city youth feel hopeless on a regular basis. In the LGBTQ community, that is over 65% on a regular basis. And so I'm really passionate about getting these skills to youth because, again, hope is teachable. And the first thing we teach them how to do is how to just experience their emotions, how to not run from them, how to experience. If they're sad, feel sad. If they're angry, feel angry, and yet not kind of act out when in that state, which is really, important. How have you been seeing? I know you mentioned Oregon, and I was there for some of the protests, and hopelessness is a consequence of race-related discrimination. Again, totally makes sense. Hopelessness is a feeling of despair. It's a sense of helplessness. And when you're oppressed in any way, that is a likely feeling and sense that you have about change. So what are you seeing there in Oregon?
Yeah, so one thing I want to mention is that just around hopelessness is that you've been working on this subject for a long time. And if you ever felt a question mark about if this is your life calling, at some point in 2020, I hope you woke up and realized that you were born at the right time, and this is your life calling. Because the subject of hopefulness and hope is shamefully undervalued by mental health professionals. I have lots of close colleagues who are child psychiatrists. Lots of relationships, lots of respect for the system. There are things that academia and these traditional systems are slow to pick up, and this concept of hope is still taken not as seriously as it should be. It's seen as woo-woo. It's not taken as a critical component. And when we at Youth Era, when we started looking at hope and quality of life improvements, we used the positive youth development 40 protective assets, which a lot of those are around hopefulness. We saw that our staff got better at working with young people. When we were looking at that as an outcome, we had better outcomes that the insurance companies, we work with some insurance companies and we have outcomes specific for them. But when we were guided by looking at quality of life improvements and hopefulness, we were meeting those markers as well. So it's a critical time to have this conversation. And when it comes to the protests in Portland, there have been moments in the last decade where I have seen the police violence, and I was so confused about why nothing was being done. And so I think there was a perfect storm with COVID, and working people have the ability to stand up right now, because they're not some of them aren't working at all, and that's not good. But the good part of that is that they're making a stance and saying, this is not acceptable. Our young people, though, they are, we have staff, young adult staff that live right in the very center of these protests. And so it's a very, living with that day in and day out during COVID is traumatizing in itself. It's necessary, but oppression is a subject that we've taught about since the beginning of Youth Era. And the reason is that young people, they say it how it is, right? They're not so polite when it comes to some of these subjects, and that's good. We love that about working with young people. But oppression theory is a subject we've been talking about for a long time, and I'm personally proud of the people of Portland. Even during the forest fires that hit, they are making a stand. And say what you want about some of the aspects of these protests. It's been long overdue to make a stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a way to kind of take the power back. I think it's so important that we recognize how we're feeling, and then honor those feelings and let them inspire us to action. I mean, I personally used my feelings of despair and hopelessness in addiction, in violence against myself and self-harm and all kinds of things, until I learned differently, until I learned that I needed to be curious about those feelings, feel them, not run from them, not act out against them, but just kind of experience them. And then work really hard to get myself into a better place, into a positive place, whether it's nutrition, sleep, exercise, therapy if necessary, medication, kind of these kinds of things. And I echo your sentiment in that youth are so powerful. They're so engaged now. They're powerful. They're talking out about kind of what they need, how they need it. And that really is inspiring to me. And when we talk about hope, we talk about both an inspired feeling or an inspired action and positive feelings. And I think that youth they're feeling their feelings, which might not always be great and seem great, but they are creating change. And so that kind of brings me a lot of, great thoughts for our future. So how do you see them positively? You know, I mean, we talk about being stuck in a room, the forest fires, you can't go outside. We know exercise is critical to mental health. We know connection with others. Like how can we adapt, and how can we be innovative in how we care for ourselves right now?
Yeah, so yeah, and you're speaking about the forest fires in Oregon, and you know, that's on top of COVID, that's on top of these protests, and still we're seeing young people jump into action. They have an instinct that, yes, this is a crisis, and what do we do in a crisis? We take care of each other, right? That's an instinct that can't be trained. And so there's a lot of awesome energy that you can tap into. During the beginning of the pandemic, the University of Oxford actually reached out to Youth Era and asked us to put together a Zoom only, right? So these are young people that we've never met. They asked us to put together an intervention that they would study the first time that we did it, right? Anyone in the nonprofit world, first off, anyone in the nonprofit world, they would be lying if they told you that at University of Oxford or an Ivy League school calling you and saying, we want you to put together this intervention, we want to study it. Like, you're over the moon, right? You're like, yes, that's the only answer you have. And we had some tech issues here starting this podcast when we were doing this new intervention that we designed, and it's all about motivation that leads to supporting others, motivation to being able to get around your friends in virtual environments and be able to understand if despair is happening. What are the signs of virtual despair? All of a sudden, we're not in a cafeteria together. So it's one thing to train youth on how to spot despair in person. How to spot despair virtually looks very different. And so Oxford wanted us to do this training, and we had never done it before. And we took our 10 years, we've been in operation since 2009, and we put together this 5-day intervention. And what I'm most excited to share with you and share with everyone about is not that our little project went well, and it did. The research was great, but there was a question that I wanted to answer for this study, and that question was, can digital ground be sacred? In other words, can we actually transform lives? Can we make real change behind a screen? And that question, I think a lot of people still have it. I certainly don't. We saw real transformation. And I've seen other examples, especially around Indigenous Peoples Day. It was just on Monday. And you see examples of this. But, you know, there's a lot of talk about Zoom burnout. There's a lot of talk about, you know, how technology is dragging and it feels like too much. But another truth is that we get to create experiences for each other with technology. You know, you wake up in the 1950s and have COVID hit, that's its own kind of despair, right? We have taken these cameras and these computers for granted over the last year. And so I'm wanting to spread the message that if you're if you're a parent or you're running an organization and you feel overwhelmed, keep trying. Like this podcast, keep trying, figure it out. There's a way to figure it out, and it's possible.
Yeah, I love that so much. And we become really immune to the wonder and awe in just life in general. And we have a lesson actually for our kids in Hopeful Minds on the power and the importance of wonder and awe. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I personally have been feeling this Zoom, you know, just this online conferences and all of these, just kind of this fatigue around that. And it is definitely a mindset. wake up going, oh my gosh, isn't it amazing that I can actually see someone live on camera? You know, it's like I forget that part of it, right? And that is such an important part. So with flying, I'm doing this, or, you know, really pre-COVID, but still, you know, we are afraid to fly, and then we get in our fear state. And instead, like, wow, isn't it amazing that I can get in this plane and I can go up and I can be transported to another part of the world? You know, I feel like we've really lost a part of that, and that wonder and awe kind of sense. And that is such an important part of, you know, being hopeful and remaining hopeful. And I'm glad to see that you saw those positive outcomes in your work. That's really encouraging. Yeah, and so I think a mindset shift.
Yeah, and just to echo some of what you're saying, you know, we know that suicide is a contagion. It's a mental contagion. We know that when someone succumbs to suicide, that it is more likely that people in their community, even people who didn't know them, are more likely to succumb to suicide or have higher attempts, right? Another contagion is apathy, and apathy is a contagion that's hard to see, right? It's not as dramatic as some other contagions, but it is a weight that's very destructive. When we're talking about what's possible, you know, and we set apathy aside, I actually had gotten into a new relationship when COVID started with someone from across the country. And this is something I shared with the Uplift youth, because we're trying to teach them how to make connections with their youth, you know, online with their friends. And so I would share things that worked with me as I was observing myself in this new relationship. Like, how do you do a relationship with someone that you're not going to meet until quarantine is over? And so, like, I would do things like put on cologne before I talked with her every night. Like, why would I put on cologne before I talked with her every night? So I asked the young people that, right? And some professionals know the answer to that, right? But it's essentially putting myself in state, right? Putting myself in state. And there are parts of our brains that start to forget that there's a screen in between us. And so if we allow ourselves to become apathetic, we could lose everything that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some exciting research around hope. Hope is a known protective factor against anxiety and depression. And your level of hope will predict your future level of anxiety and depression, which seems, yeah, that seems normal. But your anxiety and depression does not predict your future level of hope, which to me was some super exciting research. And as someone with lived experience is really powerful, because I have control. I have to change a lot of these things, how I'm seeing the world, how I'm engaging with the world. And yet it is something that I can practice. And I find myself working on these skills regularly around hope and my mindset around hope and how I see the world. And I think that's such an important kind of part of that.
Yeah, it's if there was one thing that we could put into every school and everyone who works with young people in particular, one notion, one new concept or idea. It's a very old one, and it's that help empowering someone in a way is about restoring their ability to feel hope. Let me rephrase that. It's about assisting them in restoring their own ability to feel hope and hopefulness. That word empower, right? It's not, you're not giving someone power. The power is already theirs, right? You're helping them repair whatever got in the way of that. And I think hope's a huge part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you point that out too, because we say you can't give someone hope, but you can teach them how to hope for themselves, and how to get to hope, and that you might not always feel great, and that doesn't mean you can't get back to hope, and that just being where you are and accepting that is so important. But yes, the empowerment is also really, really key. So how are youth connecting with others? How can they best connect with others during this time? I mean, we teach kids about a hope network and creating a safe, secure kind of network of people around them. And it's so predictive of how well they do, kind of that engagement. So how are you doing that specifically with youth?
I'm going to answer your question. I want to ask you one because I honestly don't know this.
Okay.
We talked about and my claim about apathy being contagious. That's not backed up by research, but suicide is a contagion. That is there research around hope being contagious?
Well, that's what we're exploring, and that's what we're trying to make happen, honestly, with Hopeful Minds. So our program is free. It's available online, and we just revised all of it. And so we're really trying to push that. I will tell you, in Northern Ireland, so we've done research, and the BBC did a documentary on our work in Northern Ireland, and that's where we've done a lot of the back kind of research on the program. It has taken off throughout the country, and it's a country that has come from a lot of conflict. And they have really embraced the notion of it. You know, when we teach kids under the age of 10, it becomes a part of who they are, which is really powerful. But yeah, that's what we hope to make happen, actually. So I think the research on that is yet to be concluded, but that's anyone who's listening, I will take a bet right now that when that research is conducted, that it turns out to be true. I don't know that it will be true, but I would bet on it. For Youth Era, we knew that isolation was going to be huge. Already with youth who experience anxiety and depression, isolation was an issue before COVID, and after COVID, we knew that it was going to be huge. And so we had to transform our organization overnight, right? We have over 50 youth peer support specialists. And so we had to go completely digital, virtual. And so we produce about 30 hours a week of new content. And that content is through this app called Twitch. A lot of people, I've been doing this work for 10 years now. I've explained a lot of social media platforms to professionals. Twitch is a hard one to explain, but it's basically you go and watch someone stream video games. So you watch someone play a game, but what's happening is they have a camera on their face and they're talking to you while they're doing it. And so we have staff that we trained and so some of them brought their own experiences in. And so every day, or 6 days out of the week, young people know on a schedule, and this is helpful for parents too, especially when school was out, that like Youth Era was going to be on Twitch, and that this is something that you could count on, right? And what's the energy like on Twitch when you go into that channel? There's a lot of enthusiasm. There are moments of talking about real issues, but it's all about community, right? We're trying to create as much as possible a feeling of community. So we're on lots of different platforms, but we're working on Twitch and Discord and Instagram, a lot of the ones you've heard before. But overall, we're really trying to push a community that any young person can access. There's never any fees or anything like that. It's all about come and hang out, and we're going to be talking about issues that you might like, or we might be playing a video game that you just want to watch us play because you like that video game. But the moments in those chat rooms, they're in, we've been doing this for 10 years, and I can honestly say that some of my top 5 moments of all of our work has happened this year during COVID through a computer screen. Wow. That's amazing. And it's amazing that you've been able to reach kids and youth in that way and provided that support, because we know that that is really key to kids getting through this. I mean, it's key for all of us, but especially now we need to get kids the support and the peer-to-peer support. There's so much research around the importance of that. And, we don't have enough trained professionals in mental health overall. And so, yes, getting kids connected with each other is really key to outcomes. So that's fantastic. Where can people learn more about your work? How can they, find out more about you?
Sure. So I would say that parents can go to youthera.org. We have another website called youthempowerment.com. And what youthempowerment.com is these are articles written by youth for youth. And by youth, they've all been vetted. We take we work with systems. So all of our services have all of the safety protocols you'd come to expect from any kind of community service that was tied to some kind of clinic, right? We take HIPAA and all of that very seriously. But youthempowerment.com are articles that youth have written. And so you can find any subject there, hundreds of different subjects, from anxiety to dealing with eating disorders to how to deal with being cyberbullied. And they're not just articles, they're videos, multimedia. But for young people who want to check us out, we're on Twitch. You can type in Youth Era on Twitch or Facebook. We have a pretty big Facebook following, so there are like resources that we share there as well.
That's amazing. Youthempowerment.com and youthera.org. Awesome. I did check out the content, and it's very creative and engaging and colorful, and which is so refreshing. I mean, I got into this work because I thought depression was so depressing. the way people were talking about it. So it's great. You can see that the youth is getting, creative, and your leadership is great. Are there any final words you have for listeners or anything you want to add?
Yeah, I specifically want to just mention something to parents and maybe adults right now. There are young people in your life, and maybe this is to not parents, because parents know every day when they wake up, they know what the state of their young people are in. But don't assume that because of social media that young people are connected and that young people feel like they're part of a community or feel like they're not alone. The number one thing that we're hearing from youth right now is that they feel alone. And I think when I talk to parents and adults in those young people's lives, when I've had the opportunity to do that, they had no idea. We assume because of social media that everyone is hyper connected. And that's a deadly assumption, right? It's an assumption that it doesn't hurt anyone to just throw that assumption away. And especially during COVID, over communicate. You might send a text to a young person in your life and that might be the only message they received all day, right? So I would ask people to over communicate and reach out to young people, even really simple stuff. I'm not talking about writing paragraphs back and forth, but a really simple text can mean all the difference.
I love that. Yeah. And I love you to kids goes a long ways. I appreciate you. I respect telling kids you respect them for what they're doing specifically. There's an interesting study. We have to say 5 positives for every negative we have to really have productive, engaging, supportive relationships. And I think a lot of parents are used to complaining to kids that, you're not doing this. And so to really be hyper aware of that right now. But I love that. It's so important for adults not to assume, and with kids and with each other as well. So that's a great piece of advice. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining today and sharing all your great insights and wisdom. I loved connecting with you, Martin, and talking about your work. And thank you for what you're doing for kids. It's, so critical right now, I think more than ever. So.
Well, it was an honor, and anything I can do.
Thank you so much.
So thank you all for listening in to the Hope Matrix podcast. We want to shine a light that hope is teachable, hope is measurable and teachable, and provide you with actionable insights for how you can start activating hope in your life today, and provide a framework so you can start talking about hope with other people and practice these skills together, because we are better with hope. Please feel free to check out the shinehopecompany.com, where we list all of our resources around how to hope. We have a lot of free programs for how to hope, including the 5-day challenge, our hope infographic with a lot of skills that showcase how to hope, and articles of how to incorporate hope into your life. We have the Hope Beat Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter that shares strategies for hope. We have a My Hope Story template, so you can write your own hope story today. Also, My Hope Hero, so we can share what our heroes are doing to activate hope in their lives. And this is especially good with youth, so they can start looking up to people that have overcome similar challenges to them and seeing how these heroes use the Shine Hope framework. We have a Hopeful Minds for Teens program, a Hopeful Minds overview, educator guides. We have a new evidence-based college course so you can activate hope on the college campus. There are programs in the workplace, overview courses, 90-minute courses for learning the what, why, and how to hope. What I want you to know about hope is it's a skill. You've got to practice these skills to become hopeful. It's easy to fall into despair and helplessness when we deal with challenges in life, and it takes intentional work and practice to get to hope. And yet it is always possible. So no matter what life brings, keep shining hope. Thanks so much for listening in. Have an awesome day. And of course, I've got to add that this program is designed to assist you in learning about hope. It should not be used for medical advice, counseling, or other health-related services. I, Fred, the Shine Hope Company, and myself, Catherine Getsky, do not endorse or provide any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I am not a medical doctor. The information provided here should not be used for the diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition and cannot be substituted for the advice of physicians, licensed professionals, or therapists who are familiar with your specific situation. Consult a licensed medical profession or call 911 if you are in need of immediate assistance. And be sure to know the crisis hotline, 988, if you are in need of support. Thanks a bunch for listening. Take good care of yourself and keep shining hope.